Thank you for joining us as we review the Tarion application process for high-rise condominiums. Please note that the information contained in this video is general in nature and does not take into account any particular requirements or circumstances involved in a specific application. When you are ready to apply to Tarion, you should first review the written version of Registrar Bulletin 10 located on Tarion's website, which details the complete application process. If any information conflicts with the Ontario New Home Warranties Plan Act or associated regulations, vendor-builder agreements, or registrar bulletins, the latter sources prevail. Please note that this overview is not taking into any account any registered condominium conversion projects, which is when the pre-existing elements of a previous structure that was non-residential is being converted into a residential dwelling, such as a factory or a church. The Tarion application process that we are reviewing today applies to newly built high-rise condominium construction, and should you have any questions about registered condominium conversion projects, please contact us. Effective February 1st, 2021, the Home Construction Regulatory Authority, or the HCRA, assumed Tarion's previous role of licensing new home vendors and builders. This means that a person who plans to build or sell a new home in Ontario must be licensed by the HCRA, and that the HCRA is responsible for granting new licenses and renewing existing licenses. In addition to licensing, the HCRA is also responsible for investigating honesty and integrity complaints made about vendors and builders' conduct and includes illegal building practices. The HCRA also manages the Ontario Builder Directory. Tarion continues to administer the warranty claims process and backstop vendors' warranties where they fail to resolve warranty claims. Tarion is also responsible for authorizing construction and sales plans of licensed vendors and builders via the Qualification for Enrollment, or QFE, and enrollment processes of homes in the Ontario New Home Warranty and Protection Plan, and we will review this process in this video. Before you can apply to Tarion for Qualification for Enrollment to build and sell a high-rise condominium project, you will first need to have a valid license with the HCRA. Once you have your license, you can apply to Tarion. Even though you cannot apply to Tarion before having your license in place, Tarion is happy to provide guidance to any applicant who is in the process of achieving their HCRA license. You can contact Tarion and we will walk you through the application process, provide the documents that you'll need to complete, and we'll give you a sense of what you can expect while going through the application process. The high-rise condominium review process is similar to the freehold homes process. However, additional underwriting precautions due to the concentration of risk may be required. Generally speaking, for a high-rise application, you may need to provide the Tarion application document, which will feature a series of risk-based questions, the type of project, the location of the project, the size of the project, and financial questions, vendor and builder agreements, a request for a guarantor, and in most cases, that guarantor will be required to complete a personal net worth statement and provide the supplemental documents to substantiate the assets that they're indicating on that statement, as well as a new guarantee and indemnity agreement, and financial information, including statements for the applicant, are also required. In addition, we will require a condominium profile form to be completed, which is a separate application that is specific to condominiums, which helps us to confirm the type of condominium being built. In most cases, we require the declaration and disclosure document, and we understand that these are in draft format at this stage, which is fine. And we will also require a sample template of an agreement of purchase and sale. If you are unsure of what documents need to be supplied, please contact us and we can walk you through that process. Depending on the size of the project, we may also require drawings and a budget for all costs of construction. And we may also require a letter of intent from a financial institution. We want to emphasize here that even though all documentation that is required is outlined in the condominium profile form, if you're unsure of what category you fall into and what documents to send in based on your specific situation, please contact us and we can review it. For example, if you've built 8 projects with 110 units in each, but are now looking to build a 1,600 unit project, our document requirements may be different. Finally, we may require additional information in the event that the person who owns the land is not the same as the vendor. The vendor who is applying for the project should be licensed with the HCRA and should also be the same entity featured on the purchase agreement as the vendor for the project. The vendor should also meet the Ontario New Home Warranty Plan Act's definition of a vendor, which is a person selling the units on their own behalf for their own purpose and who is benefiting directly from the sale of those units. For example, the vendor should not be acting as an agent for another entity, because then the vendor would not be acting on its own behalf in selling the units. Our goal is to protect consumers, and when we're talking about high-rise projects, we're talking about many units. So when something goes wrong, it can impact many, many people. We are aware of this, and there are many processes in place over the life cycle of a project that can help us make sure we have a handle on the risk and that we have good communication with the vendor. As part of our underwriting process, the requirements are dependent on experience and history, so our document requirements may differ based on experience and the type of project being proposed, though a minimum set of documents is required from all applicants. As we're reviewing your application, it's important to provide us with all documentation as early as possible, and the more information we have, the better, so we can make assessments of your risk and determine what additional requirements there may be, and the quicker we can communicate that to you will mean less potential delay in processing your application. Sometimes high-rise applicants will have other construction experience and other types of construction, but are not Tarion qualified, like hotels or apartment buildings, student residences, etc. And we will consider that kind of experience, although we can't rely on that as much as our own records. When applicants come to us with other experience like this, especially if it's local in Ontario, we can visit the site and have you walk us through it. Like we said, we can't rely on it as much as our own experience, and it is no guarantee, but we will look at this kind of experience too. As of February 1st, 2021, even if a vendor or builder was licensed previously, we still require new vendor or builder agreements as well as new guarantee and indemnity agreements. These documents have been modified to accommodate Tarion's new role, which no longer entails licensing, as we mentioned earlier, and we always encourage individuals to review them with their lawyer prior to signing. On a case-by-case basis, we may require additional information to assess the application, and when we speak with you individually, we will get a better sense of what we may require. Once a license is in place, we take all the information provided and conduct our risk assessment, which focuses on three main areas. The first area is financial strength, which is having the ability to complete a project that's being proposed. So access to capital, what type of equity there is, falls between the applicant and the guarantor, and if they have any other assets to capital, what type of equity there is. Basically how you will finance the build. Also, what is our assessment of what equity or assets that will be available to meet warranty obligations? The second area is the technical piece, which is not to be confused with the HCRA process. As part of the HCRA licensing process, they conduct some technical due diligence, and they're looking at builder education in a general sense. But what we're looking at is whether we believe you have the experience to construct the type of project you're proposing, which may require a different skill set. So for example, different project management skills managing a 300-unit project versus a small one. The final area is history, which may include any Tarion history. So anything we have recorded, such as past builder performance, any other experience outside of Tarion, for example, any past construction experience, maybe renovations, and in some cases, we may consider such experience if we're able to. We can also inspect or conduct walkthroughs for other projects that you've built, and we can conduct reference checks to gauge previous client satisfaction in previously built projects. These would be assessed on a case-by-case basis and would only be feasible and add value if in Ontario. If there's been a change in control within your organization and we've historically relied on the expertise of an individual that has left your organization, we may want to revisit our assessment of your organization's current expertise, or for any other reason that we may have concerns about, we may wish to speak with the applicant based on the past history. Interview requirements for high-rise are a little more complex and a little more involved in freehold, and we often have someone from our warranty services team attend with us to review the drawings, which helps us to understand the project from a technical point of view, also to discuss any potential warranty issues that may arise, and to provide an overview of the Registrar Bulletin 19 process. Because of this, the interview process is fairly involved and can last around 1.5 hours. If an interview is required, you will be notified early in the process. Once the application has been submitted, we will conduct our review and the interview will be scheduled. It's important to keep in mind that when interviews and/or site visits are part of the process, this may add time onto the application process, which is dependent on many factors and can be expedited by proactive communication and submission of all required documents. So we rely on you to partner with us to provide us with the documentation so that we may continue to process your application. Once everything's been done, we're ready to issue the letter. Before we review the terms and conditions, we want to define what a high-rise condominium is. A standard condominium is the most common type of condominium. The purchasers own the units and have common interest in the common elements. The common elements are covered under the Ontario New Home Warranties Plan Act for standard condominiums, and they feature Part 3 Ontario Building Code components. And we also require interviews for all condo conversions for all 5- and 6-story wood construction. Before we review the terms and conditions for high-rise, we want to remind you that Registrar Bulletin 10C is available on Tarion's website, which contains a detailed overview of this process. Vendors and builders are encouraged to review this bulletin in its entirety. There are also other registrar bulletins that you should review, as it is your responsibility as the applicant to be familiar with all applicable registrar bulletins that can be found on our website. It's important to note that as of February 1st, 2021, vendors have been receiving a terms and conditions letter called a Notice of Proposal of Conditions. Once the vendor satisfies those conditions, Tarion will issue a written confirmation, QFE confirmation, before sales can commence, which is to offer or agree to sell the units. A second written confirmation, enrollment confirmation, will be issued before construction can commence. It's important to know that the terms and conditions letter outlines the conditions only, and it is not confirmation from Tarion to build and sell. In order to sell and build, a vendor must have written confirmation from Tarion to do so. These confirmations are provided by Tarion only after the conditions are met. In the past, you would have seen a Builder Bulletin 19 clause in your letter, and this was typical for high-rise builders. The new letters don't have this, but it doesn't mean it is no longer a requirement. On the bottom of the terms and conditions letter, it reminds the vendor that they must adhere to any applicable registrar bulletins, and the Builder Bulletin 19 requirement is captured under Registrar Bulletin 19 now, which is called the Condominium Project and Design Field Review Reporting. Once we've done our review, we're in a position where we can issue our terms and conditions. And generally speaking, the terms and conditions is a document that outlines the parameters under which you can build and sell units, as well as any other obligations that must be met throughout the life cycle of the project. The life cycle of a condominium project is from the time the conditions are accepted by you up until the condominium is registered. Securities for condominiums are due before sales, and because of the number of units, the security will be higher per unit, which is typically between $20,000 and $40,000. For condominiums, security is typically provided in the form of a surety bond or letter of credit. We may also accept a deposit trust agreement, but this is only acceptable in certain cases where the declarant is the same entity as the vendor and where the vendor is experienced and in good standing. Securities are outlined in Registrar Bulletin 11H, and the release of securities is dependent on the risk category. Any questions you may have about securities can be directed to us. Registrar Bulletin 17 is a new document, and instead of adding all standard condo clauses to each letter, we put them in this bulletin. These clauses are still as important and as applicable as ever, so it's important to be familiar with this bulletin. In general, the high-rise terms and conditions letter is different than those issued before February 1st, 2021, in that we no longer require a sign back. Previously, when we issued our letters, in order for the applicant to be processed, there was a requirement for you to accept the letter by signing it back to us. Also, if you disagree with any of the conditions in the letter, you can contact Tarion and we will explain it to you. However, you will have 15 days to formally appeal the conditions through the License Appeal Tribunal as per the legislation. If the terms and conditions are not appealed, it is considered that you will have accepted the conditions. So it's very important to make sure that Tarion has the correct underwriting contact information on file. Another way to accept the terms and conditions, or if you are in a position to expedite the process and don't want to wait the 15 days, is you can send us an email, which must be from a signing officer to say you've accepted the terms and conditions, and then we'll proceed. The structure in the new letters is also somewhat different. What you'll notice is the conditions within the high-rise terms and conditions letter are similar to what you've seen in the past. However, they are categorized a bit differently. The terms and conditions letter still continues to define the parameters under which you can build and sell, like the number of units and the security requirements, and is now categorized into 3 groups of conditions, which are the qualification for enrollment conditions, or QFE conditions, the enrollment conditions, and the specified conditions. Basically, QFE conditions are any conditions that must be satisfied before commencement of sales. The enrollment conditions are conditions that must be satisfied before construction can commence. And specified conditions are conditions that must be met continuously throughout the life cycle of the project. And an example of this is our annual reviews on our files, including financial history, performance, etc. There is no confirmation for specified terms and conditions because it is expected that you will keep performing these conditions throughout the sales, construction, and until closing. Again, we want to remind you that it's important to note that the letter outlines the conditions and it is not confirmation. In order to sell and build, you will have to have confirmation from Tarion to do so. Once you achieve QFE and once all conditions are met, Tarion will give confirmation and then you can commence sales. Once you achieve the enrollment confirmation, Tarion will give you confirmation and you can start building. There are sometimes cases where the vendor and the declarant are separate entities. The declarant is the entity under the Condo Act that is the registered owner of the land, and the vendor is the licensed entity that wants to sell the project. Sometimes the two are not the same, and the risk for Tarion is that since we have no jurisdiction over the Condo Act, if the declarant is separate, we have no jurisdiction to enforce that they are acting in accordance to the Condo Act that could impact the warranties. For example, the requirement to hold cash deposits in trust with an escrow agent and the ability to transfer title to the purchaser, which is a requirement of the declarant under the Condo Act. But if the vendor is not the declarant, there is a bit of a disconnect, which can be a challenge for us. We want to make sure that the entity that is vending the project, which is defined under the Act as an entity or person that is selling a property for its own purpose on its own behalf and is going to be directly benefiting from the sale of the units. In other words, if there's a situation where someone is acting more like an agent, for example, conducting the sales, working on a fee, and ultimately everything goes back to the declarant or the developer, that would not meet our definition of a vendor, and that would be a challenge for us. We do have clauses in our terms and conditions to confirm that in cases where the declarant is not the same as the vendor will adhere to the Condo Act and will be able to effect title transfer from the declarant to the owner, something we look at to make sure the vendor entering into the purchase agreement and who is responsible for warranty coverage will be able to complete the sale. We will also ask for a development agreement, a document that outlines the declarant and the developer and the roles and responsibilities of the declarant and the vendor, so that when we understand the relationship and we understand what each party is responsible for, which helps us to understand who is doing what and who is benefiting from what. If there are concerns, we will discuss that, and if we are uncomfortable that the vendor doesn't meet our definition, we may require the signature of an officer certificate from the signing officer of the vendor, which is an attestation that they are acting on their own behalf and will be profiting financially from the sale of the transaction. And unfortunately, if they cannot attest to this, or if there is confusion to that effect, we may have an issue proceeding to grant QFE and enrollment confirmation. Organizational structures can also get complicated, so it's important that we know who the vendor is, and if the proper entity isn't licensed, this can cause delays. This is prevalent in high-rise construction. With respect to enrollments, units are due to be enrolled 30 days prior to commencement of construction. Enrollments can be submitted through BuilderLink. All enrollments will be reviewed by Tarion to ensure that the vendor had obtained QFE confirmation if applicable or has met all the conditions. If all conditions are met and fees paid, which are due to be paid 30 days before commencement of construction, Tarion will provide the vendor with the enrollment confirmation, which will be the new enrollment confirmation, certificate of completion and possession, and warranty certificate. Once you obtain enrollment confirmation, you can proceed to build the units. Sometimes there's a separate vendor and builder, which is common for condominium construction. Typically for new high-rise applicants, we like to see that the vendor is someone who has constructed this type of construction in the past. If you have a vendor and or builder license from the HCRA, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to permit you to vend and build the project that you're proposing, because the HCRA's process is very general knowledge based, where our assessment process is project based. So if we conduct our review and interview and we find there isn't any relevant experience within the applicant's team, that is, among the principals, officers, directors, etc., We may require that a separate builder be used, so when you submit your application, call us so you will know what the process is. Where the vendor and the builder are separate entities who plan to work together to sell and build a home, the vendor may apply the previous steps to obtain the approval to sell and build. If you are licensed only as a vendor, you will be asked to provide information about the builder who will be building the proposed project. The builder in this case must also be licensed with the HCRA. Both parties must sign the applicable vendor and builder agreements with Tarion. The vendor should submit the application to Tarion, and the terms and conditions will be issued to the vendor. Only the vendor can sell the home, which is to enter into purchase agreement and subsequently transfer title, and only the builder can perform the construction of the project and act as the builder throughout the course of construction. If you have any questions about the Tarion application process, please contact our underwriting team and we will be happy to assist you. We are always available to help answer any questions or concerns you may have.